His foreman, Robert Carlyle, was becoming concerned. Although Mr. Hamilton had complained of feeling poorly on the morning prior to his absence, no one expected him to be away this long. Carlyle had been with the company for almost 18 years, and when Mr. Hamilton wasn't there, he was in charge. He was responsible for overseeing the entire factory and making sure that the garments leaving the factory were of the highest quality. Everything had run smoothly, until the day the employees were expecting their pay packet. As the workers entered the factory on that May morning in 1912, Mr. Hamilton wasn't there to greet them. Robert tried to reassure the workers that this was simply an oversight, but as the day wore on with no sign of Mr. Hamilton, the 63 men and 44 women employed at the factory became increasingly agitated. They relied entirely on the money they earned. Robert was also somewhat confused. He had never known his boss to neglect his employees or his responsibilities. He had already missed one meeting with a client, and if he didn't come into work the following day, he would miss another. Robert also had a large family to feed, and although he had saved a few shillings, it wouldn't last. He had tried to call Mr. Hamilton several times by telephone that morning and didn't receive an answer. By 4 p.m., the workers were becoming more and more agitated by the delay, and Robert had no choice but to confront this problem head-on.
"I'll get to the bottom of this," he told the crowd of anxious workers. "I'll go to Briarwood tomorrow morning as soon as I've opened the factory doors. There'll be a simple explanation for it, and that I can promise. I'll return with your pay packets by day's end."
Early the following morning, Robert stood outside the factory doors, and after the last employee had taken their place, still wearing his heavy apron and factory attire, he cycled over to Carlton Lane. Neighbors that were outside enjoying the lovely warm weather stared at him as he rode down Carlton Lane. It was warmer than usual, and the sunshine was a welcome relief after several weeks of continuous rain and cold temperatures. Robert was nervous as he walked up the path that led to the Hamiltons' house. He had never been to Mr. Hamilton's home, and he felt that somehow he was overstepping his authority. Still, he knew that the employees were anxious for their pay packets, and he couldn't return empty-handed. As he stood looking up at the house, everything appeared normal on the outside. The rose bushes that were already in bloom had been dead-headed, and the grass had been cut recently. The curtains in the parlor were drawn, and the only noise he could hear was from the horses in the coach house. The neighbor across the street watched his every move from her front garden. A few seconds later, after taking a deep breath, he knocked on the heavy wooden door. Robert listened, but he didn't hear any movement inside. He knocked again, this time with a little more force, but still no response. Robert hadn't traveled this far to go back without answers, so he bravely opened the letterbox and shouted in. It was then he noticed a putrid smell so overwhelming he had to back away from the door. As he stood on the porch wondering what on earth that smell was, he saw the gardener trimming some trees on the opposite side of the Hamiltons' property. He shouted to the man, but the distance was too great. Robert then walked to the back gate, still watched by the woman across the road. One of the Hamiltons' horses was desperately trying to reach a bale of hay that was a few feet from where he had been tied. Robert released the horse, allowing him to eat freely, then called out to the gardener again. This time he turned around and waved. After explaining who he was and why he was there, Robert led Jessie the gardener around the back of the house to see if they could see anything unusual. Jessie told Robert that he had worked for the Hamilton family for almost 20 years, and although he didn't know Eric Hamilton well, he had known his mother and father. After checking every window, neither of them could find a way in or see anything unusual inside. Most of the windows had heavy curtains on them, and the smaller ones were too high to give a good view inside. Then Robert took Jessie around to the front of the house.
"What do you think of that smell?"
he asked.